Baron Jean de Selys Longchamps hadn't been cleared for the mission. In fact, he'd been flatly denied again and again. But on January 20th, 1943, the Belgian aristocrat-turned-RAF pilot strapped himself into a Hawker Typhoon and decided he was done asking permission. He turned off his radio and sent his wingman back to base. As he swept down over Brussels, hugging the rooftops, his Typhoon's engine howled through streets he knew intimately. For too long, he carried the weight of his country's humiliation, the torment of his people under the SS and Gestapo. Up ahead, rising like a black scar on the city, stood 12 stories of concrete and glass, the heart of the Gestapo in Belgium. German officers froze at the roar outside their windows. They leaned out just in time to see a streak of gray metal lining up its guns. Vengeance had arrived. In early 1943, Brussels was the subject of systematic terrorization. For over 2.5 years, the Nazis had been tightening their grip, and they were good at it. The Gestapo and SS security police didn't just set up shop in Brussels after Belgium fell in May 1940. They turned it into their personal playground. They took over the Residence Belvedere, 12-story Art Deco building at 543 Avenue Louise, and transformed it into something out of a nightmare. From December 1942 to January 1943 alone, 68 civilians lost their lives in retaliation operations. Ordinary bakers, teachers, mothers, and kids accused of aiding insurrectionists or looking at a German wrong. The occupiers weren't just maintaining order, they were crushing even the slightest thought of rebellion. Resistance members vanished. Jewish families disappeared overnight. And every Belgian knew that thick black cloud of fear hanging over their heads could swallow them next. Avenue Louise became the street of no return. Everyone knew the deal. Get dragged into number 453, and your family might never see you again. Horrifying stories multiplied many times over, confirming the SS unit's reputation as the most feared organization in occupied Europe. By January 1943, fear and despair gripped Brussels. Then, Jean de Selys Longchamps decided to strike a blow at this symbol of Nazi power, hoping to show his countrymen that the enemy was not invincible. Longchamps was born into an aristocratic family in Brussels. The son of a noble lineage, his father was Baron Raymond de Selys Longchamps. Young Jean enjoyed privilege, but showed a rebellious spirit from an early age. He was not a model student, shifting schools frequently and displaying a fickle, adventurous temperament. Nevertheless, he chose a military path in line with family tradition. By 1937, in his mid-20s, he graduated from the officers' school and was commissioned as a cavalry sub-lieutenant in the prestigious 1st Guide Regiment of the Belgian Army. When World War II erupted in 1940, Baron de Selys was a 28-year-old cavalry officer, old age to begin a new military career, yet one about to take an extraordinary turn. During the German incursion of Belgium in May 1940, Longchamps saw action leading mounted and partially mechanized troops in desperate rearguard fights along the Scheldt and other lines of defense. Despite his noble background, he wasn't afraid of the dirty and brutal battlefront, and he soon stood up as a fierce and resourceful fighter. Belgium's army, however, was overwhelmed by the Blitzkrieg. Refusing to accept defeat after King Leopold III surrendered on May 28, 1940, Jean resolved to continue fighting. In a bold escape, he hitched a ride on a German tank to slip through enemy-held territory and reach Dunkirk. There, amid the chaos of the Allied evacuation called Operation Dynamo, he managed to board a departing ship and escape to England. Longchamps was among the 338,000 Allied soldiers evacuated from Dunkirk's beaches by the Royal Navy, a narrow deliverance that ended the Battle of France. Safely in Britain, Longchamps was determined to rejoin the fight on the continent. He volunteered to return to France with a group of Belgian soldiers, but France's rapid capitulation in June 1940 thwarted these efforts. Longchamps next tried to reach Allied forces via Morocco, which was under the control of the collaborationist Vichy French regime. He was soon captured by Vichy authorities and sent to an internment camp in Marseille, and later a prisoner of war camp near Montpellier. But just like he had done with the German tank, Jean would find a way out of the situation. He engineered yet another escape, slipping out of the French camp and making a hazardous journey through neutral Spain. By way of Gibraltar, he finally reached England once more in late 1940. He immediately began looking for a way back into the war. In Britain, Baron de Selys Longchamps immediately volunteered for the Royal Air Force. He wanted to transform himself from a cavalryman into a fighter pilot, but this was impossible. The Royal Air Force considered 28 too old for flight training. However, Jean had flexible morals, so he simply forged his ID papers to knock a few years off his age. The British didn't have access to Belgian civil registry records. There was no way to disprove his claims. His audacity paid off. The Royal Air Force accepted him for pilot training. After completing instruction at the Free Belgian Training School at Odium and earning his wings in January 1941, he received a commission as a pilot officer in the Royal Air Force Volunteer Reserve. By September 30th, 1941, Jean de Selys Longchamps was posted to No. 609 Squadron in Royal Air Force Fighter Command. No. 609 Squadron was an elite unit at the forefront of introducing the new Hawker Typhoon fighter bomber into service. Longchamps quickly proved himself an aggressive and skilled pilot in this squadron, despite the dangerous learning curve associated with the Typhoon. The Typhoon was a powerful yet temperamental beast. Its 2,180 horsepower Napier Sabre engine gave it tremendous speed, exceeding 400 miles per hour, and firepower with 4 wing-mounted 20mm cannons. However, early on, it suffered serious flaws, including structural weaknesses and carbon monoxide leakage into the cockpit. Unfazed by these dangers, Longchamps embraced the Typhoon's strengths. The rugged fighter could carry bombs and rockets in addition to its cannon battery, making it a superb platform for low-level ground attacks. With this machine, Longchamps and his fellow pilots pummeled German installations in occupied France and Belgium in 1942, flying rhubarb strafing missions against trains, convoys, and other targets of opportunity. Yet even as he wore a Royal Air Force uniform, remained fixed on his occupied homeland. Through clandestine contacts, he stayed informed about events in Belgium and yearned to strike back at the Nazis terrorizing his country. According to later accounts, in 1942, he received devastating personal news. Reports reached him in England about his father's arrest and disappearance at the hands of the Gestapo. This claim was widely repeated in post-war stories to explain Jean's motive for the raid. However, it turned out to be a myth. Baron Raymond de Selys Longchamps actually survived the war. Jean's true motivations were patriotic. He wanted to deliver a sharp blow to the occupiers' prestige and raise Belgian morale at a time of despair. Longchamps harbored a fierce desire for revenge against the German security services for all the suffering they had inflicted. He set his sights on the most symbolic target he could think of, the Gestapo's Sicherheitsdienst headquarters in his hometown of Brussels. Longchamps knew Avenue Louise 453 well before the war. He'd visited friends at that very building, never imagining it would one day be the heart of Nazi oppression in his country. Now, he envisioned flying there and blasting the Gestapo stronghold to show his countrymen that the enemy could be destroyed, even if at the moment they seemed to hold all the cards. Throughout late 1942, he refined this idea into a concrete plan. His concept was essentially to piggyback on a regular Royal Air Force mission and make a detour to Brussels to strike the Gestapo's base of operations. He didn't want to be a martyr. He wasn't planning a one-way mission. He intended to get in and out at low altitude, using surprise and precise flying to survive. Longchamps calculated that a lone Typhoon, coming in fast and low, could appear over Brussels with minimal warning, hit the target, and escape before German fighters or flak could respond. Despite the soundness of his plan, Longchamps faced a major obstacle. He needed official approval to carry out such a strike. Royal Air Force pilots were not allowed to select targets on personal whim. In late 1942, he repeatedly petitioned his superiors for permission to attack the Brussels Gestapo headquarters. Time after time, he was rebuffed. The squadron and sector commanders saw the idea as too risky, not worth diverting resources from higher priority military targets. They likely suspected Jean's true motive was personal revenge, and indeed one officer told him the Royal Air Force could not, quote, fly off and play resistance fighter. The Allied High Command was also cautious about provoking heavier German reprisals against civilians. As a result, Longchamp's requests fell on deaf ears, forcing him to shelve the plan officially. Yet he never truly abandoned it. He waited, watching for the right opportunity when his duty and his personal mission might align. The chance finally came on January 20th, 1943. No. 609 Squadron was ordered to fly a low-level rhubarb mission over Belgium, attacking German transport infrastructure. Longchamps and his close friend, Flight Sergeant André Blanco, a fellow Belgian pilot, were assigned to strafe a railway junction near Ghent in northwest Belgium. Longchamps realized that Brussels lay only about 50 kilometers to the south of their target area. If he could slip away after hitting the railway yard, he could reach Brussels quickly. Before takeoff, he made a few personal preparations. He ensured his Typhoon was armed to the maximum, fully loaded with cannon ammunition, far beyond the needs of a simple train strafing run. He also packed an unusual piece of cargo, a sack full of small Belgian flags. These tricolor flags had been handmade by Belgian schoolchildren in London and given to him, perhaps a parting gift for when he finally visited his homeland skies. Longchamps took off from Royal Air Force Manston in Kent on the morning of January 20th, 1943, with Flight Sergeant Blanco on his wing. Hurtling low across the English Channel and into occupied Belgium, the two Typhoon pilots reached the Ghent area and carried out their primary task of strafing the railway yards. Even during the engagement, Blanco later noted something unusual. Longchamps was sparing in his use of ammunition, firing only minimal bursts at the trains. It was as if he were saving his cannon shells for something else, which in fact he was. As the pair completed the mission and turned for home, Jean made his move. With sudden determination, he broke formation and peeled away to the southeast. Over the radio, he quickly instructed Blanco to continue back to base alone and not to follow him, before Longchamps switched off his radio set. Blanco instantly realized what was about to happen. His comrade was heading to Brussels to finally carry out the unauthorized raid they'd often mused about. Obeying orders, Blanco watched the Baron's plane disappear and then flew back to England, leaving Jean de Selys Longchamps to press on solo toward the Belgian capital. Flying just tens of meters above the ground to avoid radar, Longchamps navigated by sight over the familiar terrain of his homeland. Reaching Brussels around 11 a.m., he descended even lower as the city's skyline came into view. The weather was clear, and the element of surprise was absolute. No alarm had been raised. Jean's flight path had been carefully chosen to set up his attack. He first thundered down Avenue Louise itself at rooftop height, making a high-speed dummy pass over number 453. The Typhoon's massive Napier Sabre engine, roaring between the buildings, made an unearthly racket that shook the neighborhood. He needed to get his targets out in the open. As intended, this startling noise drew German personnel to the office windows of the Gestapo headquarters, where they wondered what was happening. In a flash, the British fighter was gone. Longchamps pulled up and banked hard over the Bois de la Cambre Park at the end of the avenue to loop back for his firing run. He now approached the target from a different direction. He flew along Avenue de la Nation, today known as Franklin Roosevelt Avenue, and then cut through a turn onto Avenue Émile Demeaux, which gave him a direct line to the facade of the Gestapo building. This route had been selected to minimize collateral damage. By coming in over broad avenues and a park, he would have a clear shot at the large target, with little risk of stray fire hitting surrounding structures. At nearly treetop level, the lone Typhoon hurtled toward the 10-story apartment block that housed the Nazi security forces. Longchamps later described lining up the building squarely in his sights as he approached. In the next instant, all four of his Hispano 20mm cannons erupted with a thunderous volley. Longchamps raked the Gestapo headquarters from bottom to top with high-charged shells. He started firing at street level and pulled up the nose as he flew past, so that a stream of explosions walked up the facade, shredding the masonry and every floor in turn. Eyewitnesses described the scene as a sudden hell unleashed inside the building. Walls and windows blown in, office furniture splintered, and terrified occupants diving for cover or cut down in the open. Longchamps made just a single firing pass, but it was enough. In those few seconds, the cannons delivered roughly several hundred rounds into the target, given the Typhoon's combined rate of fire of about 40 to 50 rounds per second. Such firepower, concentrated with surgical precision, effectively chewed the face off the Gestapo headquarters. The sheer audacity and speed of the raid paralyzed the Germans. They scrambled to respond. A flak gun was mounted on the building's roof, but the crew had no time to react. By the time they realized the building was peppered with bullet holes, the British fighter bomber had already blasted past. Longchamps was careful not to hit other buildings. None of his shells strayed beyond the intended target, a feat requiring incredible skill at low altitude. In that brief strike, at least 4 German personnel lost their lives, with many more wounded. Among them were some senior officers. Schutzstaffelsturmbannführer Alfred Thomas Head of the Sicherheitsdienst Abteilung 3, the intelligence branch in Belgium, was slain at his desk. Similar fates reached Schutzstaffel Obersturmführer Werner Vogt, a Sicherheitsdienst officer, and the Gestapo Kriminalkommissar named Müller, reportedly the local Gestapo chief. At least 5 other Germans suffered serious injuries, and resistance sources later asserted that the actual toll may have been between 25 and 30 Gestapo personnel. Nazi authorities, embarrassed, admitted only to a fraction of these in their reports. As plaster, glass, and bodies lay shattered in and around 453 Avenue Louise, Jean de Selys Longchamps had already made his escape. He zoomed up and away from the devastation, having accomplished what he came to do. But the Baron had a few final messages to deliver over Brussels. Reaching into his cockpit, he opened the sack of miniature flags he'd brought. In a gesture of patriotic pride, Longchamps scattered hundreds of little Belgian tricolor flags out of the plane over the city. He even dropped a large Belgian flag and a Union Jack directly over the royal palace at Laeken, the residence of the exiled Belgian monarchy. Another Belgian flag he released over a neighborhood in Schaerbeek landed in the garden of his own niece, Baroness de Villegas de Saint-Pierre, a personal hello from the skies. With his mission accomplished, Longchamps sped northwest back toward the North Sea. When Longchamps climbed out of his Typhoon at Manston on January 20th, 1943, barely 30 minutes after he had first appeared over Brussels, celebration and consternation awaited him in equal measure. On the one hand, his squadron mates greeted him like a hero returning from single-handedly winning a battle. They were astonished and thrilled by his feat, a lone Allied pilot striking the hated Gestapo in broad daylight and living to tell the tale. The airfield personnel gave Jean a rousing welcome, proud of what one of their own had done. On the other hand, his commanding officer was decidedly not amused. Longchamps had blatantly disobeyed orders by embarking on this unauthorized adventure, and such insubordination could not be ignored, even if the results were spectacular. As formal punishment, the RAF demoted him from the rank of flight lieutenant to flying officer, effective immediately. He was also transferred out of 609th Squadron, posted to No. 3 Squadron RAF in March 1943, removing him from the unit in which he'd been involved in his stunt. Longchamps took the demotion in stride, understanding it was the price for his active conscience. Notably, his demotion may have been partially administrative. Some sources suggest he was already due to revert to a lower rank, but it certainly doubled as a disciplinary measure. News of the raid didn't stay secret for long. The occupiers' papers kept it small. A few casualties, a terrorist, nothing to see, but the truth ran ahead of them. It passed from doorways to train stops, from cafes to back rooms. Brussels buzzed with the same rumor. A Belgian RAF pilot had made fools of the Germans. Resistance networks ensured that within hours, the story was circulating widely in the capital. Veteran resistance fighter Herman Bodson later recalled the profound impact, quote, "The day of the attack was a day of joy. And while the news was told around the country, it was a week of joy." After so many months of repression, hope was rekindled. The attack became an enthusiasm booster of the highest order, proof that the Allies had not forgotten Belgium, and that even the mighty Gestapo could be touched. The Germans, however, were furious and fearful of the effect of Longchamps' raid. Occupation authorities took pains to repair the damage to their prestige. They temporarily shuttered the wrecked Gestapo headquarters, which was so badly shot up that it could not be used for 6 weeks. During that time, the German security forces had to relocate their Brussels operations, undoubtedly hampering their activities. The psychological damage to Nazi authority was even greater. Belgian citizens openly chortled that the occupiers had been humiliated on their own doorstep. Of course, the Gestapo retaliated ruthlessly in an attempt to save face. In the days following the raid, there were intensified crackdowns, more arrests and interrogations, and reportedly, the execution of additional hostages as a show of vengeance. Such bloody reprisals further turned Belgian public sentiment against the Nazis. German officers in Brussels now looked over their shoulders at the sky. Their sense of invulnerability was shattered, if only briefly. Back in England, once the dust settled, the Royal Air Force High Command grudgingly acknowledged the value of Longchamps' exploit. Though he had broken regulations, there was no denying the valor of the mission. In a way, Jean had forced his superior's hand. They could hardly court-martial a man who had personally shot up Gestapo headquarters and returned unscathed. Before long, attitude shifted from censure to praise. The British decided to honor Longchamps for his courage, while quietly ensuring that others wouldn't try the same trick without permission. The opportunity came with King George VI's birthday honors in mid-1943. On May 31st, which happened to be Jean's own 31st birthday, He was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross, one of Britain's highest decorations for bravery in the air. The citation read, quote, "This officer is a pilot of exceptional ability and keenness. He shows a great offensive spirit and is eager to engage and destroy the enemy whenever possible. He's shown great courage and initiative in numerous rail transport attacks and in the Gestapo headquarters attack in Brussels." After the Brussels raid, Jean de Selys Longchamps continued flying combat missions, now with No. 3 Squadron Royal Air Force. By mid-1943, No. 3 Squadron was operating the Typhoon on aggressive raids along the Belgian and French coasts, targeting enemy shipping and coastal installations. Longchamps remained every bit as daring a pilot as before. If anything, his popularity pushed him into increasingly ambitious exploits to prove he wasn't a one-trick pony. On August 16, 1943, Flying Officer Longchamps took part in an early morning mission over Ostend, Belgium, though some sources say Ghent, to intrude on German positions. During the sortie, his aircraft sustained anti-aircraft flak damage, a constant hazard for low-flying Typhoons. Jean managed to nurse his wounded fighter back across the Channel to England. While on final approach at RAF Manston, this Typhoon suffered a structural failure. The tail section gave way, a known Typhoon flaw, causing the plane to spiral out of control. The aircraft crashed violently near the runway and broke in two. Jean de Selys Longchamps was lost on impact, not even 32 years old. The loss of the Baron hit his comrades hard. No. 3 Squadron's operational record book entry for that date mournfully noted, quote, "The squadron suffered one of its greatest losses in losing Flying Commander de Selys. He had an outstanding personality of great charm, and by his initiative and great daring, set an example to others that was of incalculable value to the squadron. He was deeply mourned by every member of the squadron as a personal loss." Longchamps was laid to rest in a humble military grave, No. 3002A, at Minster Cemetery in Kent, England, far from his occupied homeland. Belgium would be liberated just over a year later, in September 1944. After the war, the Belgian government posthumously made him a Knight of the Order of Leopold and awarded him the Croix de Guerre 1940 with a palm, recognizing his valor and patriotic service. Fittingly, in Brussels, the very site of his famous raid bears witness to his legacy. The apartment building at 453 Avenue Louise still stands, and in front of it, the people of Brussels erected a memorial bust of Jean de Selys Longchamps and a plaque recounting his January 20th, 1943 attack.